Hello YouTube, Dave here again. Today I'm going to be giving you my review of the Pathfinder 2nd Edition role-playing game. I'm going to be focusing this review mainly off of things like the character creation system as well as the combat system and what sort of goes around along with those. I've had a chance to run a session of the Pathfinder role-playing game as well as to make a few different characters. And I'm really looking forward to sort of getting these thoughts out. This video is going to be sort of more of a podcast style. So it's something that you can just sort of listen to as you may be doing something else. If you want to see me flip through aspects of the Pathfinder core rulebook, let me know in the comments below. It's a 600-page book, so I just really didn't want to do a video trying to flip through all 600 plus of those pages if people aren't really into that. So if you just want to see specific chapters, let me know. I also want to thank Paizo for sending me these books for the purposes of doing the reviews. They sent these to me, but they're not controlling what's said in the video, and they're not paying me to make these videos. I just, really want to do this of my own accord, and I'm really happy to be working with such a wonderful company, because I've had a lot of great experiences with the Paizo staff since we sort of started communicating back and forth, so really happy there. So with Pathfinder 2nd Edition, the first thing I want to discuss is one of the most important aspects for the vast majority of the people that would be getting into this game, and that is as player characters and character creation. The character creation system, I think, is very intuitive, and there's a lot of elements that they've added into it that just not only makes sense, but I think propels it as one of my kind of favorite versions of a character creation system that we've had so far. Character creation consists of three major choices. There's your ancestry, your background, and then there's your class. So the staff at Paizo, I saw a video where they were talking about character creation, and they refer to it as the ABCs of character creation, and that would be why: ancestry, background, and class. All three of those elements dictate how your ability scores are going to be generated, as well as most of those options, the ancestry and the background, as well as just for completing your character, is also going to give you, instead of having just set ability score increases, they're also going to give you ones that you can sort of choose where they go. And that's one of those things that allows you to sort of customize how you want to create your character. Ancestries, I really like what they've done with them. So ancestries are now what races have always been, but they've just created more options and choices and a greater sense of diversity amongst all of those particular ancestries. Each ancestry, such as dwarf, elf, gnome, goblin, halfling, and human, all have different heritages that you can choose from as well. And those heritages give you sort of a sense of where that character may have grown up, as well as usually an ability that can go along with it. For humans in particular, the heritages allow them to choose to be either a half-elf or a half-orc, which is pretty cool the way that they sort of handled that. Each ancestry will also give you a series of feats that you gain, one at first level, and then one every so many levels thereafter. And these ancestry feats are typically abilities that in past editions the races may have just gotten all of these abilities right from the beginning, but with the Pathfinder 2nd Edition, you actually get to sort of customize your character through your choices of these ancestry feats. Not every dwarf is going to be a blacksmith or a stonecutter, so being able to choose options other than those, I think, is a really cool way of doing things. I also like the fact that you don't get all of these things right away at first level, because that's not really realistic. As a human adult, we don't have all of the skills that we, end our life with as soon as we become 18. So having the ability to sort of expand or grow is something that really makes sense. Many of the ancestry feats may require a lower level version for you in order for you to take them, but something like going back to the dwarf, for example, they may not want to be blacksmiths as they're growing up, but maybe after they've been adventuring for a while, they discover how important it is, or how much they actually, secretly love picking up a hammer and using it to craft weapons or armor or fix things. So it's really cool the way that they've done that with the ancestries. Backgrounds, and moving on to the B component of the ABCs of character creation, have also, in my opinion, become more important in this game than any other system that I've seen of the major RPGs that have backgrounds incorporated into them. So in the past, backgrounds will typically give you either a bonus to some skills or proficiency or training in certain skills. However, in Pathfinder 2nd Edition, your backgrounds like Scholar, Guard, Warrior, other things along those lines, they actually also impact your ability scores, something that I think is kind of missing from backgrounds in other RPGs, because if you grew up as a farmhand, you're probably going to have, more strength naturally. I mean, if you look at people that grew up on farms, for example, a lot of them tend to have, a bit more strength to them. And a good example of that would be Brock Lesnar, who was, a farm boy growing up, and you kind of see how big he was, even back in his high school days, just as a result of working on the farm. So the fact that they have that, again, just makes a lot of sense, and I really like the way that they've done that. And speaking of options and choices, each class in this game also has a series of choices that you can make that can allow you multiple players to have the same class but feel different. So for example, one of the ones that I discussed was the cleric. The cleric has the ability to either choose to be a war priest, where they get the armor training and they're sort of the more traditional, what we think of when we hear the word clerics. But if you look at like the clergy, for example, very few of them would actually have the martial training of a war priest. So the ability to choose a cloistered cleric who focuses on study and spell casting versus the martial training is just something that adds a new wrinkle to that class. So it's one of those things that I really, really like about it. And all the classes have those types of abilities. Bards have muses, things that sort of inspire them. You have instincts for the barbarians. You have arcane traditions for the wizard, or bloodlines for the sorcerer. So there's just a lot of options available to each of the classes. And again, that's something that makes the ability to have multiple players feel different from one another. So, for example, in the game that I ran, I had two players want to play a wizard or sorcerer, and one person who wanted to specifically play a wizard. And at first I wanted to see if maybe some of them would change their choices, but at the same time, knowing that there were these options, I thought it would be a great way to sort of test how different you can make the classes feel. So with the wizard, the person who wanted to play the wizard, his class was set. But for the other two, they didn't really have an idea of race or specific class, so I made a Fey-touched gnome, Fey bloodline sorcerer, and a goblin sorcerer, the Iron Goblin sorcerer, that had the Abhorrent bloodline. And just being able to have their innate spells, their focus spells, which are granted by their bloodline, and the differences in spell lists that those two bloodlines provided to the sorcerer, has it so that no two of those spellcasters are drawing from the same list. A couple of them do have duplicated spells, but even in that instance, it's actually quite rare. And most of the ones that are duplicated are like cantrip or sort of a minor ability. So there is a lot of options available. So one of the things that I heard, or one of the criticisms that I heard about the Pathfinder game, is that it just doesn't give you enough choices. And I've heard people even say that about the 2nd edition Pathfinder, which seems absolutely ludicrous, because there is a ton of variety available from your choice of ancestry, background, class, and sort of the class features that you get to choose from. So there's a lot of different options within there. So the character creation is, in my opinion, an absolutely fantastic system. With the ability boosts and ability flaws, you can pretty much guarantee that you're going to have a character that you're going to, is going to be good at what they do, but none of them feel like they're overpowered, sort of thing. Like none of them feel like they're too over the top. So really, really enjoying the character creation system. Next we have the combat system, and one of the things that I was kind of concerned about was how easy it would be for the players to get used to the combat system, in which you have 3 actions you can do each round, and you choose those actions from a list of options. But it actually really, after the first couple of rounds, it became a very intuitive system. And whereas when we first started, I sort of had to count some of the actions off for the players. By the time we got into our second encounter, the players were all very comfortable with what constituted an action, and it flowed really, really well. And for some players, you know, especially the two martial characters that I had, there was in other games there's sort of that, you know, sense of disappointment when you're toe to toe with your enemy, you make your attack roll and miss, and then you're done. So the ability to choose to strike again, even if it is at a penalty, at such a low level is something that the players, again, it took them a little bit of getting used to, but once they clicked in their heads that that was an option, it ended up sort of turning the tides for some of the fights, which I thought worked really, really well. Another aspect of the combat system that I like, or just the rule set I should say that I like, and something that I think went from a pretty underwhelming aspect of modern RPGs to something that could be potentially deadly, is how poisons are handled now. So that's another one of the things that I really, really enjoy about this new version, where if you're inflicted with poison, either through an attack or ingestion, you have to make your fortitude saving throw, but if you fail, you start taking, you know, like the poison damage and stuff like that, but poison works in stages. So each round you have to make another save, and if you fail, then you increase a stage. So you can go from stage 1 to stage 2, and usually there is some sort of increase in what the poison does the more consecutive saving throws that you fail. If you're able to make successful saves to bring your poison stage all the way down to 0, then you shake it. Poisons also have a maximum duration, so they're only going to last for a set number of rounds, but it did make some of the fights really deadly. Like the first encounter that I ran, just to sort of do a combat tutorial and based off the minis that I had at hand, was against some hunter spiders, and they had a poison attack, and that poison really actually ended up you know, making life difficult for some of the players. And it just went from something that was usually all or nothing or kind of underwhelming, and it makes poison feel much more threatening, which is an aspect that I really, really like about the system. And the actions themselves are all also pretty intuitive, especially the main ones that you're going to be using, like casting a spell, striding, stepping, striking, things like that. So the combat actually flowed really, really well, especially once the players sort of got the 3-action system really, you know, locked into their heads, which didn't take very long. It was one of the things that I was kind of concerned about, and very rarely did any of the players not make the most of their 3 actions. So there was only a couple of instances throughout 3 or 4 encounters where one of the players would only have taken 2 of their actions and then done nothing else. So they made really, really good use of it that way. The death and dying system is something that I also kind of like in this version versus other RPGs, in which when you're knocked down, you're considered dying, and there's a numerical value. So you start off at dying 1, and then you have to make flat checks, which is just a d20 roll, versus a DC of 10 plus your dying value. So for example, if you get knocked out just by a regular hit, you start at dying 1. If you get knocked down by a critical hit, you start at dying 2. You make your roll. If you make your roll, you reduce your dying level by 1. Or if you get a critical success, you also reduce it by 2 instead of 1. So that can, if you get hit with a critical and knocked down, but then roll a critical success on your saving throw, then you can actually be considered stabilized right from there. If your dying value reaches 4, your character is unfortunately dead. But it allows, with the fluctuation and the adding or subtracting of a number from your dying value, it sort of makes it so if the players are in a bad situation where they can't get to someone right away, there is potential for them to be able to hang on as long as possible. Instead of it just being, you know, your third roll is kind of going to decide what happens. This is a situation where you could sort of fluctuate between, you know, dying 2 and 3, for example, for a few rounds. So it's one of those things that I think kind of just works in a way that could be more beneficial overall for the players. There's also the other system that I like is the wounded value that you get even after you stabilize. So your wounded value affects what happens if you get knocked unconscious and start dying again afterwards. So in other RPGs, including like First Edition Pathfinder, if you were in the dying state, for example, if you were negative hit points, if your system allowed it, or if you were making death saving throws, the second you get a positive hit point value, you could get back up, and if you get knocked down again, you just start over from scratch. However, in this situation, you actually need to take time to rest and recover from the trauma of these multiple attacks or multiple things that are knocking you down. So you get a wounded number, so you start off, if you stabilize from the dying condition, I think you get wounded 1, and if you get knocked down a second time, instead of starting at dying 1, you get dying and then 1 plus whatever your wounded value is. So if you get hit after being revived, then you end up starting at dying 2, and if you get a critical hit after being revived, you start at dying 3. And remember, you die at 4, and you're trying to get 10 plus your dying value straight on a d20 roll. So it does create a little bit of tension there. It also creates consequences for sort of yo-yoing with consciousness and unconsciousness. So you can't just keep getting up at like 1 hit point and expect everything to be okay the next time you get knocked down. Like, there's actually consequences for what happens to you in battle. So I think that's another really brilliant aspect of the rule set. And the final thing that I kind of want to touch on is just natural healing. One of the complaints that I've heard about other RPGs, especially like modern Dungeons & Dragons, is the fact that everything seems fine once you've had a good night's sleep. You could have had 150 hit points at the start of the day, ended the day with 1, but you rest for a single night and everything's fine. And there are people that complain about that. And even though I understand the reasons why that decision was made, I do agree that it does seem just a little bit unrealistic. So with Pathfinder, you don't quite get that. When you rest for an evening, if you get a full night's rest, you get an amount of hit points back equal to your level plus your constitution modifier. To offset that, though, so that you're not spending, weeks or months healing and just resting after a fight, the medicine skill, again, also got a bit of an increase to its abilities in that you can actually make medicine checks to apply healing to a character. So you make a skill check. If you succeed, you add 2d8. They regain 2d8 hit points, or if you critically succeed, you restore 48 hit points. So you can actually do a pretty good job of just using the medicine skill to get people back up and running. Another one of the clever things that I think that they, obviously they did intentionally, is whenever you attempt a medicine check on someone, you have to wait an hour before you can make another check on them. So it's just one of those things that they can't just sit there and keep spamming until it succeeds. There is going to be time in between those checks, and you may not have the time necessary. The other benefit of that medicine skill and the ability for it to get back decent amounts of hit points is that there are ways to heal your characters without having a cleric. And as much as I like the cleric class, it's the least commonly played class of any class that I've seen recently in the last couple of years that I've been running games. And I'm running four different RPGs, role-playing games right now. And of those 4 groups, I have one single cleric, and that is it. So the ability to heal without the cleric through the medicine skill, I think, is actually probably a better way of doing it than through things like hit dice or healing surges or things like that. So I think that that's actually a pretty well thought out system that they've put into place there. And when we look at our checks as well, I know I've mentioned things like critical success or critical failure. The critical system has gotten a little bit of an overhaul. If you're familiar with the Pathfinder playtest, you may already know how critical successes or failures work in this version. So you always have your traditional, a natural 1 is considered a critical failure, and a natural 20 is considered a critical success for things like strikes, saving throws, spell casting, like spell attacks, stuff like that. That's the way that that's sort of always worked. However, in this version, if you equal or exceed your target number by 10 or greater, it's also considered a critical success. So for things like the medicine skill or attack rolls, if you have, if your opponent has an armor class of say 15, and your attack roll result ends up being 25, even though it's not a natural 20, you've succeeded by so much that it's considered a critical success, and I like that system quite a bit. Conversely, if you fail by 10 or greater, it's considered a critical failure. So if the DC for something was 18 and you got a grand total of 8, then, or 8 or lower, then you critically failed, and then you suffer typically things like double damage, or you may have you may start at like a higher value for being poisoned or diseases or things like that. So, but overall, so far with everything that I've seen in the game, I haven't really got into magic items yet, but I don't have an issue with the way that they're handled. There are items that you have to invest in, which is similar to in 5th edition, where you have to. God, I don't know why the term is completely escaping me all of a sudden, but where you can only be bonded to a certain number of items at the same time. Pathfinder does the same thing, but instead of it being based off attributes or how it was done in the playtest system, you just have a maximum number of 10 that you can be invested into. Attunement. There we go. That was the phrase that for some reason just kind of fell out of my head. So it's like the attunement system, except instead of it being 3 items, you can invest into up to 10 items. And then other things you might be able to invest in them that aren't like your traditional magic items as well. But it's an overall, it's a really decent system, and I'm really liking everything that I've seen so far. Alright, so overall, my final thoughts, or my review for Pathfinder 2nd Edition, I give this a huge personal recommendation. I'm really enjoying my experiences so far with Pathfinder 2nd Edition. I know that there is some critics of it. There are people that are not ready to move on from 1st Edition Pathfinder, and to those people, you don't have to, immediately. It's not one of those things where everyone's expecting, players of the original Pathfinder 1st Edition to just drop everything and move on to the 2nd Edition right away. It's understandable that that's not going to happen, but for people that are getting into RPGs or may not be familiar with the Pathfinder system, or just weren't necessarily a fan of how close it matched like the 3rd Edition Open Gaming license, this version of the game feels like a very different system, and it's something that I think people should try to experience. If you're not familiar with Pathfinder, this is a great way to sort of dip your feet into the pool, so to speak. The system plays well. It looks intimidating at first, and when you see a 600-page rulebook, it definitely seems a little intimidating, but I was surprised by how intuitive a lot of the mechanics felt once we got going, and it didn't take very long from the players having little to no knowledge of how the system worked to, flowing very, very effortlessly through things like the combat system. So it works really, really well for that. Again, for people that are looking to get into RPGs, if you've heard about role-playing games and you want to sort of experience them for yourself for the first time, this would be a good system to pick up. It's a little bit more complex, but it's still user-friendly enough that I don't think people are going to have too much of an issue getting into it and at least getting a few games in, even if they don't get super advanced with how they play it. Again, I was surprised by how intuitive a lot of the stuff felt once we got into it. So again, highly, highly recommend it. And for all those, for all those who come from Pathfinder 1st Edition, just have an open mind. You don't have to convert right away, and you may never update to 2nd Edition Pathfinder, and that's fine. But don't just blindly hate on something because it's a newer version of the game that you enjoy. A big thing to keep in mind is that a lot of the changes from Pathfinder First Edition to Second Edition are based off of players' feedback and players' comments to Paizo, a company that takes consumer feedback very seriously and will enact changes based off of that feedback. So this is a version of the game that is very much kind of molded and sculpted by the players that were playing the first edition version of the game. It's well worth checking out, and I hope that those who were closed off to it before maybe just have an open mind and see if you can sit in on a game, make a character and join a session or something like that. But anyway, those are my thoughts on Pathfinder 2nd Edition. Really loving it so far. I guess the last word I will say is I had no interest in running original Pathfinder, and the reason that I had no interest in it was that it was very, very similar to the D&D 3rd Edition system. It was based very directly off of the open gaming license for 3rd Edition D&D, and I had just run that version of that game for so long that I was burnt out on it, and I just had no interest in going back, and I still have no interest in going back to that system. Pathfinder 2nd Edition still uses that same open gaming license, but presents it in a fresh new way, and the ultimate compliment that I can pay to it is it took a system I had no interest in and made me super excited to start running it. Like, before I even got the books, even before I got the playtest book, I was really keen to see how this was going to shape up, and I'm not disappointed in how the game turned out as a whole. So if I was someone who just was completely uninterested in running the previous iteration of this game, the fact that this uses the same gaming license but does things so much differently, or presents things in such a new way that it makes me want to have, like, just want to run out and run a game tomorrow or today even. I would love to run another session of it. So I guess that for me would be the ultimate compliment that I can pay this game, and that's exactly what's happened. Anyway, let me know in the comments below if you guys have had a chance to run or play in Pathfinder 2nd Edition. Let me know what your experiences were. Let me know what your thoughts are on the system, what characters you created, how you found the 3-action combat system. I'd really like to know. So thank you guys very much for watching. I hope you enjoyed, and I will see you next time. Take care.